Thank you, Christy, and thank you, Joy, and thank you, Mignon, for so beautifully and warmly our service together. And I extend thanks to all of you who are with us this morning on this most rainy Sunday morning. We live in such a chaotic and disordered time. And for many of us, in the chaos of our current political and social environment, the foundations of our republic are obscured. And for some, perhaps many, these foundations are completely unknown. Today, more than ever, it is important to be aware of our country's foundational ideals, its core principles. Those core principles are being tested right now, every day, in fact. I believe right will prevail, but we cannot diminish the perils of this moment. This moment also bears the possibility of rebirth, of a genuine transformation, of a turning towards what our ideals call us toward. The following words from Loretta Williams addresses the possibilities of this moment. She wrote, "We, bearers of the dream, affirm that a new vision of hope is emerging. We affirm that we are co-creators of the future, not passive pawns. We stand united in the affirmation of our hope and vision of a just and inclusive society. We affirm a unity that opens our eyes, ears, and hearts to see the different but common forms of oppression, suffering, and pain which affect us all. Within ourselves and within this gathered community, and others like it across the land, we will discover the strength not to hide in indifference, not to withdraw in fear. So together we pledge action to transcend those barriers around us, be they racial, political, economic, or social. Affirming that hope energizes and enables us to move forward. Now I will light our chalice flame as we continue the beginning of our service. And my brief reading for our chalice lighting is from Hannah Arendt, a great author and writer who wrote a great deal about totalitarianism. She wrote, "Even in the darkest of times, we have the right to expect some illumination, and that such illumination might well come less from theories and concepts than from the uncertain, flickering, and sometimes weak light that men and women across the years generate in their lives and in their works. And we will kindle that flame and remember its light in our circumstances now, and they shall spread their light over the people and nations. May the life of each inspiring person we know illuminate our lives with hope and vision, like the light that now casts its light in the space before us." Thank you, Pam, for that beautiful and powerful story. The Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations is the most democratically based religious movement in America. Our Unitarian roots, in particular, have strong connections with the early American ideals of our republic. And the Universalist side of our religious movement is an intrinsically democratic way of framing the human condition, in that all are considered to be equal. Our link with the ideals of our republic are made clear by our fifth principle that states that we affirm and promote, I quote, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. There's two important aspects to this. One is that it links the right of conscience to be true to one's own understanding of life. And on the other hand, it affirms democratic process, which is fundamentally a relational ethic and moral law. Secondly, our principle affirms the right of conscience and the democratic process in society at large, so that we have in our very principles the affirmation that society itself must be permeated with the values of democracy and the rights of conscience. Because implicit in that is that a threat to democracy and the right of conscience anywhere is a threat to the right of conscience and democracy everywhere. And we see in totalitarian governments how the right of conscience and democratic process in all its forms is wiped out. The form of democracy created by our founders placed democratic process and individual liberty and the right of conscience in the very center of the fabric of how we understood society should be. Before I address that, I would like to digress to mention the tragic side of our history. The founders of our republic, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, and others, were flawed people. At different points in their lives, they despised other members of this very group of founders. At various times, members of this group were political enemies of one another, but at certain points in their life, they held together and worked collectively as one. And the formation of our republic was one such example. But they were flawed people in many ways, as are all human beings. Furthermore, their thinking, politically, socially, and otherwise, had, I should say, the limitations of the context of their times. Like all human beings, they could not fully escape the limitations of the times in which they lived, and from which we, from our vantage point, can see clearly. Furthermore, the history of this country, which those founders put into place, is filled with terrible and tragic violations of liberty and justice, the very ideals on which the country was founded. The evil of slavery, racism, the seizure of lands from Native people, the massacre of Native people, the crimes against and the exploitation of the poor and the marginalized by the rich and the powerful, the oppression of women are but a few of the tragic elements of the history of this republic. And in our own times, we have been made aware of the terrible legacy of white supremacy and how it affects our lives right now. Martin Luther King Jr., in 1965, July the 4th, said it well when he stated, "On the one hand, we have proudly professed the noble principles of democracy, and on the other hand, we have sadly practiced the very antithesis of those principles." Yet I believe we must not lose sight that this country was founded upon ideals that are very precious and which speak to us over the years. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. repeatedly urged people to live up to the American dream, to live up to American ideals, to really stand on and from the foundational principles of this country. Those ideals of our country provide a space within which we now are able to have a conversation about white supremacy and other important issues. Of great importance is not only the values and the principles upon which our country was founded, but the fact that the paradigm of governance that was created by our founders formed an open and fluid system capable of infinite correction and change. And it is that capacity on which many of our hopes are vested. Our system of governance allows us to continue to work on the realization of our ideals as the unfolding drama of history presents us with challenges. Now let me turn to our founders. History, as our founders understood it, was dominated by people who wielded power arbitrarily on a religious, hereditary, financial, or military claim to power. Throughout human history, they believed, power has resided in the hands of psychopaths, megalomaniacs, despots, and people who claim a power that is not rooted in the good of all. That is the social and political landscape they saw through their reading of history and their understanding of the political life of humanity. Fear is the foundation of most governments, John Adams wrote. The question is, does it need to stay that way? Can it be changed? Can a new possibility be created? And that is what the founders sought to do. How do you create a government which actually gives power to certain people to rule within certain limitations? Power to exercise authority that's grounded in the will of the people, and at the same time give individuals political, religious, economic, and social freedom. And their solution, as we know, was to form a government of three major branches, which operated in different spheres of activity. and to put into place checks and balances which would impede anyone or any group or any branch of government from exceeding its rightful sphere of activity. I'd like to look more deeply at the founders' views, using John Adams as the person whose views I would share. Why John Adams? He had a very high degree of influence in the formation of our republic. He never owned slaves. He was opposed to slavery. He had a mutually respectful and co-equal relationship to his wife, Abigail. And he had, I think, a high level of integrity. And by the way, he happened to have been a Unitarian. What did John Adams think was the purpose of government? What did it all mean? Why did it matter? Adams wrote, "The form of government which communicates ease, comfort, security, or in one word, happiness to the greatest number of persons and in the greatest degree is the best." Do we hear that phrase used much these days? The founders, however, were not merely interested in creating something that would have a positive impact on people's lives. They were trying to avoid something. And uppermost in what they were trying to avoid was tyranny. Tyranny in any form. Unlimited power vested in a small group, person, or political entity, in which one group or one group of persons is allowed to subjugate, manipulate, or control others for their own gain. Adams was under no illusions about the ever-present threat of tyranny. "The jaws of power," he wrote, "are always open to devour, and her arm is always stretched out, if possible, to destroy the freedom of thinking, speaking, and writing." Adams wrote that powerful people are inevitably enamored of themselves, filled with grandiosity about their rightness and their superiority to other people, which empowers their belief that they should have the power. Power, he wrote, always thinks it has a great soul and vast views beyond the comprehension of the weak, and that it is doing God's will when it is in fact violating all the laws of God and nature. Adams believed that people of faith, morality, and principle were absolutely essential to democracy, that democracy could not just stand by itself, that it needed people of principle to function. He wrote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And he wrote, "Human passions unbridled by morality and religion would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net." Now, translated to a modern and secular audience, what he was saying is democracy is utterly dependent upon the majority of people in a society having a baseline sense of morality, decency, fairness, and respect for the law to function. And that democracy will collapse if those conditions do not exist. Now, if you think that Adams was a religious fanatic, he wasn't. It was he that wrote, "This would be the best of all possible worlds if there were no religion in it." And he also wrote, "The government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion." Adams understood that religion, just like the rights of heredity, just like the rights of power, just like any sense of privileged opinion, could be used as a weapon of power. And that is one reason why he, along with the founders, key founders of this country, were strong advocates of the separation of church and state. Adams integrated in a way I think you can appreciate unrestrained thinking with religious faith. In 1816, he wrote a letter to his son, John Quincy, said, "Let the human mind loose. Superstition and dogmatism cannot confine it." But Adams was a principle-based person, not a dogma-based person. To be good, he wrote, and to do good is all we have to do. We are living right now in a social situation which the late, great Dr. Murray Bowen would call, I think, a regressed society. Regression occurs whenever principles decline in their influence on human behavior and are replaced by the force of instinct, emotion, groupthink, irrational belief, and tribalism. Regression can affect an individual, a family, a congregation, a group, an entire society, or all the above. And we are living in a regression. In 1974, when it was revealed that Richard Nixon had violated certain laws, the pressure of his Republican colleagues drove him out of office. Today, a man who has the same position as Richard Nixon has done and is doing weekly things far exceeding the lawlessness of Nixon and the powers that be which control events in Washington, D.C. right now shrug. That is regression. In 1996, a very important and well-known conservative leader of the Republican Party got up before the Republican National Convention and a national audience and said this: "If there is anyone who has mistakenly attached themselves to our party in the belief that we're not open to the citizens of every race and religion, then let me remind you tonight that this hall belongs to the party of Lincoln and that the exits, which are clearly marked, are for you to walk out of as I stand this ground without compromise." Today, in 2020, racism has been used again and again to divide people and to foment conflict and even violence. At least 87 Americans have been killed by right-wing, white supremacist-oriented terrorists in the first 3 years of the current administration. This week, the Department of Homeland Security, a conservative area within our government, named white supremacist groups as the single most dangerous domestic extremist threat in the nation. That is regression. This week, Thursday, October the 8th, U.S. Senator Mike Lee said on Twitter, and I quote, "Democracy isn't the objective. Liberty, peace, and prosperity are. We want the human condition to flourish. Rank democracy can thwart that." A U.S. senator publicly proclaiming that he does not believe in democracy. No one does anything to respond. That is regression. This week, the president called for the indictment and prosecution of Barack Obama and Joe Biden on invented charges. That is what happens in totalitarian governments. Our standards have fallen so low that this kind of anti-democratic authoritarian behavior is greeted with shrugs. We are living in societal regression. We live in a time where principle-centered leadership and grounding in the ideals of our republic has nearly vanished, and tolerance for unprincipled behavior and speech prevails. Think of it. John Adams spoke very often of the fragility of democracy. He did not think that he and the founders were creating some monolithic form of government that was durable and would last through all the ages and would be immune from decay. He believed the contrary, that democracy was fragile. He pointed out on many occasions that democracies have destroyed themselves throughout history. Let us have open eyes. Let us have open ears to what's going on around us. Let us be aware of the regression that has occurred in our society over just a 4-year period. I conclude with some words from John Adams, and I think he speaks to us in these words across the years. "Posterity," he wrote, "you will never know how much it cost the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it. If you do not, I will repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to preserve it." I would like to extend my deepest appreciation to all the people who make our service possible. I am every week so deeply impressed by their dedication and professionalism, and I am also very deeply appreciative to all the people who every Sunday make this service possible by presenting a part of it. And I am certainly thankful for those who did so today, and delighted to see an appearance by the choir as well. My reading for the Extinguishing of the Chalice comes from Stacey Abrams, who wrote, "I am neither optimistic or pessimistic. I am determined." May that determination be in all of us. My closing words in benediction come from Maureen Killeran, who wrote, "No matter how weak or frightened we may feel, we each have gifts that can make a difference in the world. In this coming week, May you do at least one thing to support the broken, to welcome the stranger, to celebrate what is worthy, to do the work of justice and love. Be strong. Be connected. Each day act so that you may be a little more whole.